My name is Catherine Mercer. I am 35 years old. And on a Wednesday afternoon in October, I walked into my husband's office with a turkey sandwich and a smile and found him unconscious on the floor. I want to tell you what that moment is like because I think people who have not experienced it imagine it as dramatic in a cinematic way, screaming, chaos, adrenaline clarifying everything. What it actually is a specific and terrible confusion. The mind refuses for a few seconds to interpret what the eyes are seeing. My husband, Stephen, was on the floor of his office between his desk and the window. He was not moving. He was on his side. His face was slack in a way that faces are not normally slack. I said his name, then louder. Then I was kneeling beside him, and my hand was on his face. And I was saying his name the way you say something when you are afraid the word itself is the only thing standing between you and the worst possible version of what is happening. He didn't respond. I called the ambulance with hands that were shaking so badly, I misdialed once and had to try again. I gave the address in a voice I did not recognize as my own. I sat on the floor beside him and kept my hand on his chest, feeling it rise and fall. It rose and fell. He was breathing. That was something I kept repeating to myself as the longest 4 minutes of my life passed before I heard the siren. They took him. I followed in my car because someone told me to, and I drove the 6 blocks to Riverside Medical in Portland, Oregon, with no memory of the drive afterward, none at all. The doctors said exhaustion. They said severe stress response. They said his body had simply reached a point of overload and shut down in the specific way that bodies do when they have been running past their limits for too long without the person acknowledging it. They said he needed rest. They said he would be all right. I believed them. I sat beside his hospital bed for 3 days and I held his hand and I watched him sleep, and I told myself that when he was better we were going to talk about the late nights and the distance and the locked office door at home that had appeared 6 months ago, and that I had let myself not examine too closely because examining it required a conversation I had been afraid to have. I was going to have that conversation when he was well. And then on the 7th day his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He was sleeping. The phone was on the bedside table. I picked it up to silence it without looking at the screen, but I looked at the screen. I wish I hadn't, not because the truth should have stayed hidden, but because there is a specific and irreversible quality to the moment when something you have been half sensing becomes something you know completely. You cannot unknow it. You cannot go back to the moment before the screen lit up in your hand and showed you what it showed you. What was on that phone was not just a secret. It explained everything. The late nights, the distance, the locked door, the exhaustion that had put him on the floor of his office. When the truth finally surfaced, not just what I saw on the phone, but all of it, everything that unraveled in the days after, it didn't just break me. It destroyed every person in our family, and nothing was ever the same again. But before I tell you what actually happened, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's begin. Stephen and I had been married for 8 years. We met when I was 26 and he was 28, through a professional networking event in Portland that neither of us had particularly wanted to attend. We had both been talked into it by the same mutual colleague, a woman named Joan who had, apparently, done the same with us both independently, which we only discovered in the middle of our first conversation when we compared notes on how we had ended up there. He was a financial advisor. He had his own firm, a small practice, Mercer Financial Planning, that he had built from scratch in his early 20s with the particular focused energy of someone who had grown up without money and understood viscerally what it meant to people who were trying to build security. He was good at his work. His clients trusted him the way people trust someone who both understands the technical landscape and actually listens when they talk about what they are afraid of. I was a high school biology teacher. I taught at Lincoln High for 7 years before moving into curriculum development at the district level, which is where I was when this story takes place. We were not wealthy, but we were solid. We owned our house. We had savings. We had 2 daughters, Lily, who is 6, and Maya, who is 4. We had the life that you build when 2 working people are careful and honest and are facing the same direction. Or I had believed we were facing the same direction. The locked door had appeared in April. Stephen had started working from the home office we had converted from a spare bedroom 2 years earlier, which was common enough. Many of his clients preferred virtual meetings after the pandemic, and he had kept the hybrid arrangement. The office had always been his space. I had no reason to go in there, and no habit of it. The lock was new. He had installed it himself on a Saturday in April while I was at the farmer's market with Lily and Maya. When I came home, it was there, a new deadbolt on the interior side, keypad entry. I had stood in the hallway looking at it, and then gone to find him. He had explained it as a client confidentiality measure. New regulatory requirements. He needed to ensure that sensitive financial documents and screen content were not accessible to anyone without client authorization, even accidentally. He was apologetic about the aesthetics of it. He said he should have talked to me first. The explanation was reasonable. Stephen's work did involve sensitive client information, and there were indeed regulatory frameworks around it. I had accepted it with a small lingering discomfort that I had set aside because setting it aside was easier than pressing. The late nights had started around the same time. Not dramatic, he had always worked hard, had always had periods of intensity. But this was different in texture. He came to bed after midnight regularly. He was distracted at dinner in a way that was specific, not present in his mind somewhere else, but present and effortful in the way of someone managing something beneath the surface of every ordinary moment. He had lost weight. I had noticed. I had asked. He had said the stress of the year's market volatility was taking a toll and that he was working on managing it. I had believed him. I am not ashamed of this, but I want to name it clearly. I believed him because I wanted to believe him and because the alternative required a courage I had not yet summoned. The phone screen showed two things in the notifications visible without unlocking it. The first was a series of messages from a number saved only as a letter, a single initial, M, the content of which was visible in the preview and was not ambiguous. They were recent. They were numerous. They had a history visible in their tone that was not the history of something new. The second was a notification from a banking application I did not recognize. Not our joint account app, not the family savings app we both used. Something else. A number in that notification, a balance, that I looked at 3 times because the first and second times my mind would not accept it. It was a negative number. A large negative number. With a pattern of transactions visible in the notifications preview that had the cadence of something that had been building for a long time. I set the phone back down on the bedside table with the care of someone handling something fragile, even though the fragile thing was not the phone. Stephen was still sleeping. His face was peaceful in the way faces are peaceful when the body has finally been forced to stop. I sat beside the bed for a long time. I watched him breathe. I held the two things I had just learned separately because holding them together was more than I could manage, and I tried to understand the shape of what I was sitting inside. I called my sister that evening when Stephen was sleeping and Lily and Maya were with my mother. My sister, Karen, answered on the first ring because sisters answer on the first ring when something is wrong, which she knew from my voice before I said anything specific. I told her the two things. She was quiet while I told her. Then she was quiet for a moment after. Then she said, "What do you need right now?" I told her I needed someone to help me understand what I was looking at with the financial notification, because the first thing, the M thing, was something I understood with terrible clarity. But the financial thing, the specific account, the pattern of transactions, the number, I needed someone to help me look at it clearly before I could know what it meant. Karen's husband, Peter, was an accountant. She put him on the phone. What Peter helped me find over the following 2 days, while Stephen was still in the hospital, while the doctors were satisfied with his recovery, while I sat in the chair beside his bed and looked at my phone and looked at his face and tried to hold myself together, was the architecture of what had been happening. Stephen had been managing client accounts for years with the trust and access that financial advisors are given by the people who believe in them. He had, beginning approximately 18 months earlier, been using that access in ways that the people who trusted him had not authorized. Not theft in the crude sense. Not money taken directly and deposited in his personal account. Something more elaborate and, in its elaborateness, harder to see quickly. Transfers that appeared as investment movements, reallocations that had the surface appearance of strategy, a web of transactions that required significant financial expertise to recognize as what they actually were. Peter recognized them. He said, "Catherine, this is serious. This is very serious. You need a lawyer before anything else." I sat in the hospital hallway outside Stephen's room, and I looked at the floor, and I thought about 8 years of marriage and 2 daughters asleep at my mother's house, and a man in a hospital bed who had put himself on the floor of his office because the weight of what he was managing had finally exceeded what his body could carry. I thought about the clients, the people who had trusted him with their retirement savings, their children's college funds, their careful accumulations of a working life. The people who had sat across from him and talked about what they were afraid of and trusted him with the technical landscape and trusted him, more fundamentally, with the belief that he was who he appeared to be. I called a lawyer. The investigation that followed was handled by federal authorities. Financial crimes at the scale of what Stephen had done fall within federal jurisdiction. I am constrained in what I can say about the specifics of a case, and I will respect those constraints here. What I can tell you is that the number of affected clients was significant, that the amounts were significant, that the firm, Stephen's firm, the one he had built from scratch in his early 20s with the understanding of what security meant to people who had grown up without it, was closed by regulators within 3 weeks of the investigation becoming formal. Stephen was charged. He cooperated with investigators from the point that the case became formal, which his attorney had advised and which he did with a completeness that suggested the weight had been crushing him long enough that cooperation was, in some part, relief. He was convicted. I will not detail the sentence here except to say that it is significant and that he is serving it. I filed for divorce during the legal proceedings. Stephen did not contest it. We sat across from each other in a lawyer's office once during that process, the only time I had seen him in person since the hospital, and there was a conversation that was not sufficient for everything that needed to be said, and that was also, in some ways, enough. He looked at me with the face of a person who has seen the full damage of what they have done and cannot find a proportionate response to it. He said, "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough." I said, "No, it isn't. That was all. Lily is 9 now. Maya is 7. They know their father is not with us, and they know in the age-appropriate terms that we have managed carefully, with the help of a family therapist who has been extraordinarily good, that things are different than they were. The full knowledge of what happened will come to them in pieces as they grow, at the pace that their capacity to absorb it grows with them. My mother knows everything. Karen knows everything. My father-in-law, Stephen's father, a retired electrician in Beaverton who had worked hard his whole life and who had been as bewildered as anyone by what his son had done, had appeared at my door 3 weeks after the charges were filed, not to defend Stephen but to tell me he was sorry and to ask if there was anything he could do for the girls. I had invited him in for coffee, and he had sat at my kitchen table, and we had both cried, and he had become, in the aftermath of everything, a consistent and quiet presence in Lily and Maya's lives. The clients. I think about the clients most. People who trusted Stephen with things they had worked their whole lives to build. Some of them have been partially made whole through the restitution process and the insurance mechanisms that exist for exactly this kind of breach. Some have not and will not be. That damage is real and ongoing, and I carry awareness of it the way you carry something you had no part in creating and no power to fully repair. I went back to teaching. Not curriculum development, back to the classroom, because I needed the specific grounding of it, the dailiness of 30 teenagers looking at a biology worksheet and needing someone to explain why the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell and how evolution works and what DNA actually does. I needed that specific and ordinary usefulness. I had picked up the phone to silence it. I had looked at the screen. I had wished, briefly and completely humanly, that I had not. But the truth was there before I looked. It had always been there. The locked door and the late nights and the weight in his face and the body that gave out because it could not carry it any further. All of it had been the truth, waiting to be seen. Seeing it was not what destroyed our family. What happened before I saw it destroyed our family. The choices, made in the dark, over 18 months, by a person I thought I knew completely. The seeing was just the moment the dark ended. And the light, even when it shows you something devastating, is still the light. You find your way in it. Slowly, imperfectly, with the people who stay. You find your way.